Welcome back to UbiPsych, where I see psychology everywhere. It's been much more than a decade since I had a very important turning point in my life. As you can probably tell from looking at me, that turning point occurred in my 20s. I was quite successful in life. I did really well in school. I was in a graduate program for psychology, and it was going incredibly well. I owned a business that enabled me to work from home. Every job I'd held was at least fairly successful. My relationships were successful. I had the number of friends that I desired to have, which is another way for saying not that many, but they were good relationships. And there was one glaring exception to that, which was I was very overweight, and I didn't want to be. And I tried and tried for years to take control of this, and I was really confused why I couldn't succeed in this one facet of my life. And I became mildly obsessed with it. And the success in that I can now say I've maintained for about 10 years came from a very simple start. Very frustrated, angry, and confused at why someone as smart as myself, as generally successful as myself, couldn't control my own behavior in certain domains of life. So I sat down, pulled up Google, and typed in the words, "Why can't we control our own behavior?" You know it's not a simple answer. The first time I did this, I stayed up all night reading answers. This became a trend, and I spent more time on this topic through this phase for the next 2 years or so than I did on my school. I still kept my grades up, but I actually cut back on classes even and finished slower than I could have. The real reason was that I was obsessed with this other topic. And I found a lot of information and started applying it to my life, and found interestingly that the best information I could find, particularly that which was published in psychology journals, had been sitting there for years. Some of it was new, but most of it wasn't. And I knew nothing of what I had read. Literally reams of information. Study after study, I just started consuming them and wondering, how come nobody knows about this? One particular topic that definitely was a huge part of turning myself around was the work of Roy Baumeister, Kathleen Vohs, and others about willpower and self-control. Their research, like all research, was a culmination of those working with them and those working before them, but was groundbreaking in my mind as it laid out the idea that we're not just decision-making machines, and when I ate too much and didn't exercise, that wasn't just poor programming or not wanting things bad enough or making stupid decisions. Rather, they said that self-control was a resource. And like any resource, you can run out of it. And in fact, you tend to run low on it at the end of every day. And those things that wear on you, like difficult people and situations, take right from that resource, and you get closer and closer to losing control over yourself. That concept, along with others, turned everything around for me. I was able to change my behavior 5 or 10 times more successfully than before. And I had challenges. Naturally, I gain weight. If I'm not trying, if I'm not on some sort of limited eating and exercise regimen, I immediately gain weight. I had all sorts of health problems, mostly nerve-related. At one point, I was having so much trouble that if I exercised in any way that caused a muscle burn, I would get sick for 48 hours. As it turns out, it had something to do with lactic acid and my body's inability to process it, or a sensitivity to it, or something. But I made it through that as well. And I realized that I had significant challenges, and that I'd progressed to this point where even when I have a special challenge like I can't exercise without making myself sick, I had only gotten better over time. And the answer, as well as I could tell, was that I was using real scientific answers. Some of them were biological, mostly psychological, because I already knew that the physics of the situation don't change, and that if I changed, everything else would fall in line. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not here to tell anyone what weight to be. And I don't necessarily think thinner is better, but I was an unhealthy weight. And if you are not happy with the weight you are, then that is the sole determining factor that you want to do something about it. I would encourage anyone who's in a dangerous zone of weight to do something about it, but that's up to you. So I kept working on this, and next thing you know, I had put together just a rock solid group of things that were working for me. And then I branched out and decided I'm going to help other people, and I opened a coaching practice. I'm not a very social person, so the coaching practice was never wildly successful. Those that I talked to did really well, but most of the time I found out that they didn't need exactly what I needed. There was a basis, a foundation of things that they didn't know they needed to know. What I came to call the operator's manual for the human being. Gosh, that sounds cheesy, but I really mean it. Imagine getting some sort of device and struggling with it for years, then finding a manual under the couch. And you go, oh, that's how it works. I was also baffled by the fact that, again, this information was disconnected from people. It seemed like no one else knew this information, even though it was sitting there in the literature. Some of it was a little hard to apply, but most of it wasn't. And I ran through all the contradictions, all the levels of everything. So not only does it appear like self-control is a resource, but you can cognitively overcome it sometimes. Some research came out sort of debunking the work that said that self-control is a resource, saying that if you don't believe it's a resource, then it's not. And I said, wait, does this change everything? Did I believe in a lie? Did this help me, but by believing in something that wasn't even true? As it turns out, it is true that it's a resource, but there are exceptions and many other tools you can use. But next thing I knew, I not only knew how to do this for myself, but for other people, to say, let's fit your situation, a very custom approach to help people to figure these things out. And I was doing that a little by Skype and a little bit locally, but ultimately it just wasn't for me. And I found other opportunities that were more interesting. I started teaching in the universities and things like that. And so I stopped coaching. And again, it was never wildly successful, but I worked with enough people to know that I really had something here. And now that it's been all these years, I want to share that. So this is the beginning of a series here on YouTube where I'm going to unload all of this information. The idea, the hope is that once I get it all up, you can run through these and get significant help. I also want to make a book or an online class or something about this, but it's not ready. So I need your objections in the comments, your requests, things like that as we go. Tell me about your situation or challenges. Mainly this will be later when I propose something. Sometimes to me it'll seem so actionable, but you'll hit a roadblock all your own. So that's why I'm here today. I want to tell you a little more about it, but if this interests you, please do subscribe. I'm going to post this all free to YouTube. And what I want in return is just your feedback. Hopefully, I'll be able to put together a book or something that will factor all of that in. It's not quite universal enough, but it's extremely powerful. And you probably haven't heard most of it. And a lot of it can change you very quickly. When I was doing coaching, I remember having a meeting where I was trying to launch part of my business through a website. And we were waiting for someone else to show up to this meeting. It was with the people who were going to host an education website for me, where I could attract clients and things like that. And someone was running late. So the one guy said, hey, if this is what you do, can I ask you a few questions? And I was like, of course. So he asked some questions, very pointed questions. And some of my responses really surprised him, but I said, this is how that works. This is how that works. And this is how that works. 15 or 20 minutes went by and our other person finally showed. And we actually stopped working together. Wasn't a great fit. I mean that in the true sense. Sometimes you say that when, the product was crappy, you didn't like the people. No, it was just not a good fit. But then years later, I think 5 years later, that guy reached out to me and said, I just wanted to thank you. You completely fixed me. And I was like, fixed you of what? I had forgotten the conversation. And he told me, he said, remember that conversation up in the office? We were waiting for so-and-so. Oh yeah. Yeah, we talked about going to the gym and we talked about eating. And yeah, you really seem to absorb that. Well, in those 15 minutes, he absorbed what he needed to turn his entire exercise regimen around. It was mainly about exercise for him. And this really inspired me to do more with it. So I've continued on this path for quite some time. It's interesting, if you wonder if you can also get that much out of 15 minutes, I'll try to put that sort of information in these videos. But be aware, he was a very, very successful entrepreneur, probably a genius. But here's what I knew, was that I did describe the rules of the game, the operator's manual for his mind, to him correctly. And in the hands of someone with his brilliance, it was all he needed. It was instant and powerful, and it just took over. Like anyone who's super intelligent and knows the correct rules for a game, they're going to win. So it's a moment I'm really proud of, because I didn't even intend to do it. I didn't know it could be that transformative for him. The approach that I've come up with over time is really interesting. If you remember how I said that at one point I could barely exercise, that was a burden. It was a real challenge, but it taught me something that I don't think I would have learned otherwise. And it is the incredible value of taking it easy. My very next video is going to talk about this in more detail. But if you just think very basically about the following scenario. When you exercise on a machine, by running, lifting weights, and you push yourself to exhaustion, pain, or difficulty, you are creating a negative association. And we also know that negative associations, conditioning, is very powerful. As it turns out, it seems it's more powerful than our cognitions or our thoughts. So one of the bases of my entire approach is that we have to acknowledge which psychological factors are more powerful, such as conditioning. That, oh, that hurts. That's hurt me 10 times. That's hurt me 50 times. That's made me out of breath 100 times. And that builds and crushes your motivation. More so, it makes your motivation irrelevant. You just don't want to do it. When I couldn't work hard, I just worked persistently. It built a habit and all positive associations. Exercising is not unpleasant. Exercising intensely can be. So join me for my first video on this series with a lot of content after this, which is going to get into how conditioning and other factors play a role in our ability to manage our exercise behavior. Again, please like and subscribe if you enjoy this content, or support me on Patreon. Thank you.